Morning guys, Ariel over here at Fineth. It's kind of a gray, rainy day outside, and so it seemed like a good day to bake an apple crisp. I've got a whole pile of apples here that were kind of going a little bit soft at the grocery store, so they were discounted. Only cost me a couple dollars to get this whole stack, and they do have some bruises on them. Probably wouldn't be the best for eating fresh anymore, but for baking into an apple crisp, they're going to be just perfect. So I'm going to start with a 9x13 dish here. This is a glass baking dish that I use for an awful lot of different kinds of baking things, including apple crisp. This is a really simple recipe if you've got apples, super easy to do. So since these are grocery store apples, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of all the annoying little stickers and then wash them. As I said, I'm going to end up with some wasted, brown spots and such that I'm going to trim out, but that's okay because they'll just go out in my compost bin. If you guys want to do a recipe like this, you can start with apples and use just about anything else you like. You can certainly do an apple crisp with just apples. I kind of prefer doing that with some other flavors. One of my favorites is cranberries. I do have cranberries. I buy whole cranberries often when they're on sale. Or when they're for sale at all around some holidays, because at least here grocery stores don't tend to carry whole cranberries any other time of the year. So these are frozen, they can just sit there on the counter and thaw for a little bit, and they're going to go in with the apples. In the meantime here, you can hear the water pump running. Do try not to run the water any more than I need to, just because living off grid, I carry my water all by hand, and so you get a lot more careful about how much water you use when you do that. But it works and it's great, and I can cook and do dishes and all of that. You just have to put up with the kind of annoying RV pump sound, and that's okay because usually it's just me here, and so there's no one else being bothered by it. So, got apples. Clean up my mess here. I just recently re-oiled my countertops with some mineral oil to protect the natural butcher block wood. So they're nice and shiny right now. Gonna just put them all on this lid. Give me something handy to bring them over to where the camera can see me a little bit better. I don't use a specific amount of apples generally. I just use, there's my favorite little paring knife, enough to fill a 9x13 pan. So again, as you can see, there's going to be some brown spots in these. I'm going to trim some of those out. And some of these are getting a little bit softer than would be pleasant for me to eat as a fresh apple. But for a baked apple that's going to get soft anyway, they're just fine. I do usually check the local grocery store for discounted and about to go bad produce, because there's often things in there that there's nothing wrong with, or at least nothing wrong with for certain things. Like overripe bananas are great for dehydrating or making banana bread or things like that. Overripe apples are great for making apple crisp or applesauce. And without a full orchard of my own fresh fruit, which would be my preference, it's a good way to save a little money and still be able to do some of those other things. So just peeling, or sorry, not peeling. You could peel your apples. I'm just coring them. I don't mind the apple peels. Do wash them. There can certainly be pesticide residues on peels, and some people don't want them for that. But there is also a lot of the actual nutrition in an apple is in the peel, and that is why I choose to wash the peels and keep them. You'll see in a minute when I start slicing them, I'll slice them super thin, and I find it to be still a pleasant texture. If you get really big wide slices of apple peel, sometimes it seems a little oddly chewy in something like an apple crisp, but if you slice them super thin, I've always enjoyed it, so that's just the route I go. And I'm not sure if I use quite all these apples, so I'm going to cut any with spots or little bruises first in case I don't use them all. That way at least I get all the softest and closest to spoiling ones in my pan. You could use an apple core. I've just been slicing apples with a paring knife my whole life. It's a pretty automatic motion. I also don't own an apple core because that one's got a big brown spot. It only does one thing, core apples. And paring knives do a whole lot of different things, and so they're a more versatile tool for a kitchen with only so much space, like a tiny house. Anyway, I'm going to see how many I can pile in here before I start slicing. As I said, the rest of the cores and everything I don't use for the apple will go out in my compost pile, which will eventually go into the garden. In the meantime, sometimes my squirrels and chipmunks steal things from my pile. It's part of why I don't put any meat scraps out there or anything like that, because there is so many bigger wildlife things, a lot bigger than a squirrel, and so I do just go with putting veggie scraps out there and paper products and that kind of thing. That one's kind of mushy. Anyway, so that's what's going to happen with these scraps. I do keep a little compost bucket right outside my door. That whole half is kind of too mushy. So that it's just a little bucket so I can toss things in it kind of as I'm cooking here, and then easily go dump the whole bucket in the compost bin because it's kind of at the far end of the clearing, both so that any smells from it stay away from the house and it's out of sight. Sorry, I had to break there for a minute and make some space on the memory card for my second camera. I have got a little camera up here now, so hopefully I can cut in some shots of directly above what my hands are doing for cooking videos. Got a little cool tripod there that clamps onto the top of the counter, so we'll see how that works. Anyhow, looks like I am going to actually use all of these apples to fill one pan. So finish this, and I will go dump my waste here into the compost. If you have not had years of experience with a paring knife, you probably want to go a little slower if you're coring fruit that way, so you don't pierce the knife straight through into your hands. Okay, so now I've just got to slice all these up, and then we'll make a topping. On the note of a topping, I did a little bit ago pull a stick of butter out here, and it's been sitting on the counter so that can soften. And now, like I said, I do leave the peels on. I just make pretty thin slices. Again, this is a skill that you might want to practice a little bit and a little bit slower if you are not super familiar with using a paring knife for cutting like this. But this motion where you cut against your thumb is much safer than doing this kind of motion. However, the wiring in your body works for your reflexes to your brain. Your fingers get a message much quicker, and maybe because it even goes directly there, not to your brain. I don't know how that works, but you're far less likely to cut yourself doing this, even with a sharp knife up against your thumb, than you are cutting this way. I assume because the message that you're cutting into your skin has to travel the whole way up and around and back down to here, whereas here, you know, you only have two digits that far apart, and it just, you know, it's not impossible, but it's a lot safer and a lot harder to cut yourself cutting against your own thumb like that. I don't think that's the way children are usually taught anymore, but it is the way I learned how to cut things. I don't think I've ever cut my thumb doing this. I've certainly cut my fingers cooking in various ways, but not with this particular motion. So as you can see here, to give you a slow slice idea, you know, those are pretty thin little slices, and as I said, I don't mind at all having the apple peel and that extra nutrition in there. And plus it saves a lot of time versus peeling all of the apples, and you lose a lot of apple that way. So just going to finish slicing these up. As I said, this isn't maybe technically an apple crisp because I'm going to add cranberries. I've also done apples with peaches. Probably my favorites, though, are apples with some kind of berry. Every now and then my grocery store, I guess because I tend to buy a lot of groceries, will send me coupons for free bags of frozen fruit. And then I will often pick up some kind of berry and use it in here too. Apples with blueberries, apples and raspberries, apples and blackberries. Those are all good fruit crisps mixes in my opinion. I like berries. Make sure I'm not losing any whole apples down under here. And this is going to fill the pan pretty close to the brim, but the apples will shrink some as they cook. I don't make a lot of desserts, though they're kind of fun things to make. I'm not a big pastry, donut, kind of fan myself, but they are fun to make for other people. But this kind of mostly fruit-based desserts are something I really enjoy. And so when I make desserts, that is usually the kind of thing I will make. Somebody had asked me about what my general kind of cooking style is, or my cooking background. I say there's quite a variety there. I did grow up in a kind of Pennsylvania Dutch area with some cooking recipe influence from that kind of background. However, sadly, a lot of more modern versions of what goes on in those households, that people tend to be very good cooks and make very, very tasty food, tends to be often severely lacking in the health department. And my parents not only, had that background, but they also really enjoyed just branching out into all kinds of worldwide international cuisines. And so I grew up eating quite a variety of different things. Grape leaf wrapped lamb something, stir fries, just a whole variety of things. And as far as personally now, I do cook, not strictly, but mostly grain and dairy free due to some food allergies of myself and several of my friends who I cook for most frequently. So there is going to be the majority of what you see me cook is or could easily be modified to work for a lot of different food allergies, because that is something that I have experience cooking with. So you can see my apple pan, pretty clear, full. Tuck those in there. Like I said, those will start to shrink as this bakes. So now that's my apples. I need to make a topping. If you wash things right away, like just apples on a paring knife, it will rinse off with water really easily and not be dried on later. So now I'm going to set my apple pan out of the way and grab a mixing bowl. That will do the trick. Again, I don't have a specific recipe, but generally what I'm going to put in here is a gluten-free all-purpose flour. This is just a generic mix of other kinds of flours. You could use regular wheat flour if you've got no allergy issues. Just plain old white or whole wheat flour, either one would work. Hopefully the camera can see what's in the bowl there. I just dumped, I'm going to guess that's maybe a cup and a quarter of flour in there. Then I am going to use some oats. You could use whole oats or quick oats. These are quick oats. You can see how the oat grain is kind of in little flakes instead of whole pieces. Either one would work. The whole ones just stay a little chewier, and I like the texture of these better. I have used both. And these are a gluten-free oat. Again, it could be any kind of oat. I'm going to do about an equal amount of that. And then some brown sugar. I do use honey for a lot of sweetening, but for a crummy topping like this, honey doesn't give you quite the same texture. So I'm going to put maybe a good solid cup of brown sugar in there. Shake that out of the bag. If that was packed, I think that would fill up about a 1 cup measuring cup, looking at what was in the bag to start with. and butter. This is almost soft enough, but I would like it a little bit softer. So to speed that up, I'm going to make use of my wood stove that is currently hot. I could obviously melt it on the stovetop, but the wood stove over here, which is probably out of the picture, is hot right at the moment. You can maybe hear the crackling of the flames in there. So I'm just going to set that on there and let it finish softening my butter for a minute. In the meantime, I'm going to put these frozen cranberries on top of here. I know this looks full, but with a small shape like a berry, they'll kind of roll down in the cracks here. And onto the counter. Tuck them in here. They tend to make their way down through the apples as it cooks. Well, maybe I should put a few more in before it was quite so full of apples. You could layer these in here. You could put them on the bottom, whatever. I just usually end up dumping them on top. And you could use less. I really like the flavor of cranberries. I like the little bit of tartness that it adds to something sweet. And so we're going to just make them all go in here whether they like it or not. So now we've got apples and cranberries. I think I lost one on the floor somewhere I'll have to find. And let's check on my butter here. Oh yes, it's melting on the wood stove. Okay, so that dish that I'm going to pull back off the wood stove in just a minute has flour of some kind, oats of some kind, brown sugar or some other sweetener, and butter in it right now. The other thing I'm going to add is cinnamon. Use a lot of cinnamon, so I buy a pretty big container of it. Pull that back off there. It's not quite too hot to touch. And I'm going to dump, I'm going to say at least a generous tablespoon of cinnamon in there. That's probably more like a tablespoon and a half. And then grab a fork and mix. Again, it's too bad I don't have videos that give you a sense of smell, because smelling cranberries and cinnamon together is just such a warm, cozy, homey kind of scent that just feels particularly nice on a kind of gray, raining day outside. The other noises you might be hearing in the background, if you're going to ask, are probably the creek, which is running really high with all the snow melt and the rain today. The fire crackling in the fireplace. I know it's out of sight down there in the corner, but there is a fire going in the wood stove. Or the fact that you can hear the rain very faintly, I don't know if it'll show up for the camera at all, very faintly drumming on the roof. It's kind of been drizzling off and on, sometimes a little harder, sometimes almost stopping. And I prefer sunny days, but the rain does make the snow go away faster. Some of my butter chunks are still a little bit hard. The other way you can soften your butter, obviously, if you have one, is to use a microwave. I don't have one in my tiny house. It would use almost too much power for my solar system. Plus, I just kind of like not using a microwave. So, in just a minute, we're going to pull that back over here, finish mixing the butter in. And then I'm going to put the topping on top of here, which is going to require a little bit of packing because I've got this so full. Now, when I baked in Pennsylvania, where I grew up, an apple crisp you could just put in the oven and it would make the apples completely soft all by itself with no cover. In this area, I now live in Wyoming, what I have found is the air is so dry here that the moisture kind of evaporates instantly as it's cooking and your apples just kind of shrivel up instead of actually get soft and juicy. So I do cover it with foil for the first, at least until the apples look pretty soft. Then I will often pull it off so the top can actually get crispy, hence the apple crisp name. Again, but that does seem to help if you have a very dry climate to keep some of the moisture in there so the apples and everything are kind of steaming themselves as they bake. If you live somewhere super humid, you probably don't even need to bother with the foil. I never did for many years. I've just found it helpful in a dry climate. Check on my butter again. Maybe I better grab a hot pad. I've made my bowl too hot to touch. my butter's all softened up enough to mix more conveniently. There's no reason, unlike a pastry or something where you want real flakes of butter for the texture, there's no reason you couldn't just completely melt this butter and, to a totally liquid state and stir it in. There, you don't need a flake to stay in a crumb topping like this. Again, these proportions aren't real exact. If you have any kind of oaty thing with butter and sugar on top of fruit, it's going to taste good, so it doesn't really matter. You can experiment with whatever you like. Some other spices you could put in here that would go well would be, cloves, allspice, kind of all those pumpkin pie or apple pie kinds of spices. They would go well. I just put cinnamon in here. The camera above me should be able to see that down into that bowl and see that the butter's kind of all melted. Everything looks kind of moist and mixed together. Just trying to get the last little dry edges to blend in there. And I've got a pretty good crumb. So, this is going to go on top of the whole rest of the operation. And the easiest way I've found to do this is to just pack it on with your hands. When you've got a really full pan like this, you'll probably bounce some out over. But if you hold your hands right on the edges, you can prevent a lot of that. It'll kind of pile up there. And again, as I said, when this is baking, this whole thing is going to shrink down. So I'm going to end up with one full pan when I'm done by starting with one very overfilled pan at the start. Pretty clearly well overfilled, as you can see. There's no reason you'd have to go this high. A lot of people like more of the crumbs in proportion to the fruit. I like a lot of fruit in proportion to the crumb, so I pile my fruit way up high so that you can only put that much crumb on top. Now that I've made a little mess here, let's move this over. Just wiped the counter off before I started here, so I'm just going to scoop this up with my hands and sprinkle it right back on top. Okay, there I've got one crumb-topped pile of apples and cranberries. And cover with foil. I'm going to turn my oven on. This is a propane oven. Check out some of my other videos if you want more info about that. But I always like to check that my baking racks are where I actually want them to be from whenever I bake flat. Use a sheet of foil. Again, not a step you need to do if you are in a more humid climate. The shiny side of foil goes toward food. That's so the food doesn't stick. The matte side, the less shiny side, is what absorbs the heat. So the non-shiny side is up, shiny side is down. This doesn't have to be sealed perfectly, but I've got it pretty well tucked in. I'm going to pop it in the oven. Now it's going to bake for about an hour. Usually does a pretty good pile of... Set my timer here because I tend to get distracted doing other things and forget. About an hour should make them pretty soft, or at least soft enough for me to check and probably pull the foil off so that then the top can get crispy. Now I've just got to clean up, put my foil away, wipe up my counter where I made a mess. Got one pan because I sliced my apples directly into the pan where I was going to bake them. Now the only dishes I really have to do are one fork and one bowl that I mixed the topping in. So it's not a very, and I guess the paring knife, which I already watched. It's not a very labor-intensive meal. This you could easily make ahead. You could either make up to the part where I had done before it went in the oven ahead of time and put it in the fridge. If you wanted to keep the apples from browning at all, you could put a little bit of lemon juice on them. I don't personally care if apples get brown. That's natural when you slice them. But you could do that, refrigerate it, and bake it right when you need it if you want to do something that you can prep ahead. Or you can even bake it, have it all done, and apple crisp is great leftover and reheated. So it's a nice thing to have on hand. I'll feed a few people, probably have some friends over, and last for a few days. as well. So I'm gonna, that's gonna bake for about an hour, and I'll check back in an hour when I pull that out of the oven to take a look. Okay folks, there goes our timer. It has been an hour since we popped this in the oven, and believe me, it's smelling pretty amazing. Let me see how I can pull this out so the camera can see. Now I can see through the sides, under that foil, the apples are looking soft and bubbling. I'm just going to bring this over here. You can see all the juice in the bottom there and how bubbly and full that is. It is definitely time to take the foil off. When you're pulling foil off of something, be ready to tell you to let out a blast of steam, which might give you a steam burn if you're not careful. Lost the cranberry. So now the top is going to be kind of soft and soggy because it's been covered. So I'm going to pop this back in here. It would certainly be edible. I mean, all the things would be edible before we bake it, but we're just going to make it crispy on top. Now, I did forget to mention before I had turned off the camera earlier, the oven temperature. With something like an apple crisp, it's not important that it's real specific. Mine happens to be at 375. You could bake an apple crisp at 350. It would take just a little longer. But 375 seems to be pretty good for crisping up that topping especially. So now I'm going to be done with my foil. I'm going to give that another, let's say 10 minutes at least to crisp up the topping. Again, I'll set a timer just so I remember. The timing on something like an apple crisp is also not real precise. Apples aren't going to get overdone in 5 minutes. If you bake a cookie 5 minutes too long, that'll be the difference between gooey and runny and brick hard. But with an apple crisp, that's not the case. So anyway, we're going to give that a few more minutes, and then we'll pull it out and see what it looks like then. Okay guys, it's been about 10 minutes. We're going to take another look at our apples crisp and see if it's actually crispy this time around. That is looking pretty good. Turn the oven off before I forget. Okay, well, hopefully the camera can see we've got a pretty crunchy hot topping there. You can see how much the level has shrunk in the pan here, and we're now almost down to level with the top instead of piled up the way it was. And as this cools off, it's going to shrink a little bit further. So now we're all done. It's a really easy dessert to make. Like I said, if you can get your fruit pretty inexpensively, whatever works for the kind of area you're in. It's not a very expensive thing to make, and really if you do this once or twice, you can make apple crisp faster than you can watch this video about how I did it. Enjoy guys, check out my other tiny house cooking videos and other tiny house videos if that interests you. Have a wonderful day.